Zachary Taylor was born on November 24th, 1784, on a plantation in Orange County, Virginia. He was the third of 5 surviving sons in his family and had 3 younger sisters. His father, Richard Taylor, had served as a lieutenant colonel in the American War of Independence. Zachary was a descendant of one of the signers of the Mayflower Compact. Zachary's second cousin was James Madison, the 4th president. In June 1810, Zachary Taylor married Margaret Mackle Smith, whom he had met the previous autumn in Louisville. The couple had 6 children together, including Sarah Knox Taylor, who married Jefferson Davis in 1835. Sarah died at age 21 of malaria shortly after her marriage. Jefferson Davis would later go on to become the first and only president of the Confederate States of America. On May 3, 1808, Zachary Taylor joined the U.S. Army, receiving a commission as a first lieutenant of the 7th Infantry Regiment. He was among the new officers commissioned by Congress in response to the Chesapeake Leopard affair, in which an American frigate had been boarded by the crew of a British warship, sparking calls for war. Zachary spent much of 1809 in the camps of New Orleans. He was promoted to captain in November of 1810. His army duties were limited at this time. In July 1811, he was called to the Indiana Territory, where he assumed control of Fort Knox. During the War of 1812, Zachary successfully defended Fort Harrison in Indiana Territory from an attack commanded by the Shawnee chief Tecumseh. Zachary gained recognition and received a brevet promotion to the rank of major. Later that year, he joined General Samuel Hopkins. Zachary moved his growing family to Fort Knox after the violence subsided. In spring of 1814, he was called back into action under Brigadier General Benjamin Howard. That October, he supervised the construction of Fort Johnson near present-day Warsaw, Illinois, the last toehold of the U.S. Army in the upper Mississippi River Valley. Upon Howard's death, a few weeks later, Taylor was ordered to abandon the fort and retreat to St. Louis. Reduced to the rank of captain when the war ended in 1815, he resigned from the Army, though he re-entered it a year later after gaining a commission as a major. For 2 years, Zachary commanded Fort Howard at the Green Bay, Michigan Territory settlement. He then returned to Louisville and his family. In April 1819, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel and dined with President James Monroe. In late 1821, Zachary took the 7th Infantry to Natchitoches, Louisiana, on the Red River. They set out to locate a new post more convenient to the Sabine River frontier. By the following March, Zachary had established Fort Joseph. That November, he was transferred to Fort Robertson at Baton Rouge, where he remained until February 1824. He spent the next few years on recruiting duty. In late 1826, he was called to Washington, D.C. In May of 1828, Zachary was called back to action, commanding Fort Snelling in Michigan Territory on the northern Mississippi River for a year. After some time, Zachary was promoted to colonel of the 1st Infantry Regiment in April 1832. At that time, the Black Hawk War was beginning in the West. The end of the war in August 1832 signaled the end of aboriginal resistance to the U.S. expansion in the area, and the following years were relatively quiet. During this period, Zachary resisted the courtship of his 17-year-old daughter Sarah and Lieutenant Jefferson Davis. He respected Davis but did not approve of his daughter becoming a military wife, as he knew it was a hard life for families. In May 1838, Brigadier General Thomas Jessup stepped down and placed Zachary in command of all American troops in Florida, a position he held for 2 years. His reputation as a military leader was growing, and with it he began to be known as Old Rough and Ready. After his long request of relief was granted, Zachary spent a comfortable year touring the nation with his family and meeting military leaders. During this period, he began to be interested in politics and corresponded with President William Henry Harrison. In anticipation of the annexation of the Republic of Texas, which had established independence in 1836, Zachary was sent in April 1844 to Fort Joseph in Louisiana. He was ordered to guard against any attempts by Mexico to reclaim the territory. Zachary chose a spot at Corpus Christi, and his army of occupation encamped there until the following spring in anticipation of a Mexican attack. Zachary commanded American forces at the Battle of Palo Alto and the nearby Battle of Resaca de la Palma. Though greatly outnumbered, he defeated the Mexican force, which consisted of the Army of the North, commanded by General Mariano Arista, and forced the troops back across the Rio Grande. These victories made him a popular hero, and within weeks he received a brevet promotion to Major General. The national press compared him to George Washington and Andrew Jackson, both generals who had ascended to the presidency, although Zachary denied any interest in running for office. In September, after crossing the Rio Grande, Zachary's forces inflicted heavy casualties upon the Mexican defenders at the Battle of Monterrey. Zachary was criticized for signing a liberal truce, rather than pressing for a large-scale surrender. Afterwards, half of Taylor's army was ordered to join General Winfield Scott's soldiers as they besieged Veracruz. Mexican General Antonio Lopez discovered through an intercepted letter that Zachary had committed all but 6,000 of his men to the effort. His remaining force included only a few hundred regular army soldiers, and Lopez resolved to take advantage of the situation. Lopez attacked Zachary with 20,000 men at the Battle of Buena Vista in February of 1847. Outmatched, the Mexican forces retreated, ensuing a victory for the Americans. In recognition of his victory at Buena Vista, Zachary was elected an honorary member of the New York Society of the Cincinnati on July 4, 1847. Zachary remained at Monterrey until late November 1847, when he set sail for home. While he would spend the following year in command of the Army's entire Western Division, his active military career was over. In December, he received a hero's welcome in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and his popular legacy set the stage for the 1847 presidential election. Zachary Taylor had never publicly revealed his political beliefs before 1848, nor voted before that time. He thought of himself as an independent, believing in a strong and sound banking system for the country, and thought that President Andrew Jackson should not have allowed the Second Bank of the United States to collapse in 1836. He believed it was impractical to talk about expanding slavery into the western areas of the U.S., as he concluded that neither cotton nor sugar could be easily grown there through a plantation economy. He was also a firm nationalist, and due to his experience of seeing many people die as a result of warfare, he believed that secession was not a good way to resolve national problems. Zachary, although he did not agree with them, aligned himself with Whig Party government policies. The president should not be able to veto a law unless that law was against the Constitution, that the office should not interfere with Congress, and that the power of collective decision-making, as well as the cabinet, should be strong. By late 1846, Zachary's opposition to the presidential run began to weaken, and it became clear that his principles more closely resembled Whig orthodoxy. Still, he maintained that he would only accept election as a national, independent figure, rather than a partisan loyalist. Zachary declared as the 1848 Whig Party convention approached that he had always been a Whig in principle, but he did consider himself a Jeffersonian Democrat. Many Southerners believed that Zachary Taylor supported slavery and its expansion into the new territory absorbed from Mexico, and some were angered when Zachary suggested that if he were elected president, he would not veto the Wilmette Proviso, which was against such an expansion. This position did not enhance his support from activist anti-slavery elements in the North, as they wanted Zachary to speak out strongly in support of the proviso, not simply fail to veto it. Most abolitionists did not support Zachary since he was a slave owner. Many Southerners also knew that Zachary supported states' rights and was opposed to protective tariffs and government spending for internal improvements. Taylor received the Whig nomination for president in 1848. For his vice president nominee, the convention chose Millard Fillmore, a prominent New York Whig. Taylor defeated Lewis Cass, the Democratic candidate, and Martin Van Buren, the Free Soil candidate. As president-elect, Zachary Taylor kept his distance from Washington, D.C., not resigning his Western Division command until late January 1849. He spent the months following the election formulating his cabinet selections. While he would not appoint any Democrats, Zachary wanted his cabinet to reflect the nation's diverse interests, and so appointed the seats geographically. He also avoided choosing prominent Whigs. Zachary began his trek to Washington, D.C. in late January, a journey rife with bad weather, delays, injuries, and sickness. Taylor finally arrived in the nation's capital on February 24th and soon met with the outgoing President Polk. The Democrat held a low opinion of Taylor. With less than 2 weeks until his inauguration, he met with Clayton and hastily finalized his cabinet. Taylor's term as president began Sunday, March 4th, but his inauguration was not held until the following day out of religious concerns. His inauguration speech discussed the many tasks facing the nation, but presented a governing style of defense to Congress and selection and sectional compromise instead of assertive executive action. Throughout the summer of 1849, Taylor toured the northeastern U.S. to familiarize himself with a region of which he had seen little. He spent much of the trip plagued by gastrointestinal illness and returned to Washington, D.C. by September. As Taylor took office, Congress faced a battery of questions related to the Mexican secession, comprising three major territories acquired by the U.S. after the Mexican War: California, New Mexico, and Utah. It was unclear which of the accusations would acquire statehood and which would remain federal territories, while the question of their slave status threatened to bitterly divide Congress. While a Southern slave owner himself, Taylor had no particular bias towards the Southern faction of Congress, which sought to maintain its right to slavery. His major goal was sectional peace, preserving the Union through legislative compromise. As the threat of Southern secession grew, he sided increasingly with anti-slavery Northerners. In Zachary's view, the best way forward was to admit California as a state rather than a federal territory, as it would leave the slavery question out of Congress's hands. The timing of statehood was in Zachary's favor, as the gold rush was well underway at the time of his inauguration, and California's population was exploding. The question of the New Mexico-Texas border was unsettled at the time of Taylor's inauguration. The Taylor administration considered combining the California and Utah territories, but instead opted to organize the Utah Territory. To alleviate the Mormon population's concern over religious freedom, President Taylor promised they would have relative independence from Congress despite being a federal territory. Arguably, the Taylor administration's definitive accomplishment in foreign policy was the Clayton-Buller Treaty of 1850, regarding a proposed interoceanic canal through the region known as Central America. On July 4, 1850, Taylor reportedly consumed copious amounts of raw fruit and iced milk while attending holiday celebrations and a fundraising event at the Washington Monument, which was under construction. Over the course of several days, he became severely ill with an unknown digestive ailment. Fever ensued, and Taylor's chances of recovery were small. Despite treatment, Zachary Taylor died at 10:35 p.m. on July 9, 1850. He was 65 years old. Zachary Taylor was interred in the public vault of the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. from July 13, 1850 to October 25, 1850. His body was transported to the Taylor family plot where his parents were buried on the old Taylor homestead plantation known as Springfield in Louisville, Kentucky.